What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And once a month, I host online conversations for fathers that are sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization, and Dove Men Care. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. It is the last Sunday of September. Like, where has this month gone? And I'm here in Toronto. You would think it's maybe the middle of July with the weather we're having right now, but it is epic as always. And every last Sunday of the month on Black Canada Talking, we have our panel of three who usually rock, well, they don't usually, they rock the house. And just to tell you, Black Canada Talking is a live online event that provides Black Canadians the opportunity to give their takes and POVs on stories that are of importance to them. So as I was saying, last Sunday of each month, we have three incredible Black Canadian thought leaders sharing their takes on some stories that they've decided they want to share about ahead of time. So let me introduce first, Elle Jones from the East Coast. What's up, Elle? Okay, Ella, you're on. I can't hear you.
I forgot to take myself off mute.
It's okay, Ella. It's all right.
You always ask me first.
Yes, because I was raised to say ladies first. So it's always ladies first.
So
how are things?
We're restarting school, obviously. So just getting back into that with the online teaching and, just a lot of work, but I'm good.
Excellent. Great to hear. Next up, the two Ottawanians, is that how you call it? I don't even know if that's the correct pronunciation. But first off, we have Mr. Warren Clarke. How are we, Warren?
I am very well. I did not forget to take myself off mute. No shit. I'm very well. Thanks for asking. It's a pleasure to be on every Sunday of the last month, every Sunday. So looking forward to this segment. Thank you.
Excellent. And of course, we have Cesar. Are you going to be on mute? Come on, don't be the only one that's not on mute.
Hello, Dr. Vibe.
Yay! Did you get back safe from Niagara Falls?
Yes, I got back safe. Thank you. Beautiful Niagara Falls. Important to take some time off, doing that very important self-care, especially when you're Black. Everyone, of course, but especially when you're Black, and especially when you have a loved one, family or else, but to invest in the people we love and in ourselves, always.
Well, Wonder, I'm happy to see that all you are safe and you're fine, and that's very, very important. So let's get into it ASAP. Since the last time we chatted, the Prime Minister of this country, has decreed that the federal government is going to partner with banks to launch a $221 million loan program for Black entrepreneurs. What do we think about this? Who wants to jump into the fire on this one first?
I will go ahead.
Yeah,
I'll nominate myself. There's many concerns, but I'm going to also trouble the waters by mentioning an oxymoron where there's many benefits to this. Okay. The concerns we have to think about what capitalism is now doing to our Black community. As we see the government always using neoliberalism as a way to get out of their problems, we're looking at them. We're seeing moments where the federal government is partnering with IBCs and the social banks of the Canadian financial economy here and providing loans. Now, we have to be very critical when we think about what a loan is and what loans really mean within our Black communities. The one thing we have to understand is our social capital. If it's true, and I'll be on the line saying it is true, in many spaces in our ATB communities is very low. And we have to acknowledge that money management is something that's a work in progress. And I say this based on experience from the programs and the initiatives that I do here in Ottawa. And across, Ontario, to be very honest, is we need to focus on how we can strengthen the Black dollar. It's not to say that this is not a call to say Black entrepreneurs is going to squander the money. This is not what that is. But we have to look critically at how we can leverage this loan, if it is a loan. And I'll talk about the problematics of the loan in itself in a moment. But we need to understand how we can leverage this loan to make Black economic power within the Canadian social socioeconomic, social and political economy. You know, when you think of a loan, particularly these banks, we have to one thing always keeping in mind: the whiffing. There's always going to be a whiffing for anybody giving a loan, and the whiffing for these banks is our interest rate. So they're not going to get this loan for free. They're going to make money on top of the money. And we also have to consider the fact that we're living in a pandemic, and that is hugely problematic for particularly for our Black business owners. And here's number one where it's problematic. It's problematic in the sense that how if we go into another lockdown Canada wide, how are these business owners going to be able to even increase their economic platforms enough to even make enough money to pay back that loan plus the interest rate? This is a setup for failure. It really is. And if you're not critical enough and thinking about how the economy runs in this country, it's really time to take stock of how this works and understand and learn the economics behind these things. Because if we go back in a lockdown, as I've just mentioned, it's going to be very problematic for these organizations or companies, Black organizations or business owners, entrepreneurs, to make money on that money. Number two, we have to also think about what a loan and setting up people with a loan with the banks. I mentioned the interest rate. I haven't understood what the interest rate just yet is for these loans, but I can bet my bottom dollar it's going to be high. Particularly where the entire country is facing a pandemic, which is impacting our economic way of living. So, it sounds good and dandy. Yeah, the banks are partnering with the federal government to say, yeah, we're going to give this money to the community. But then again, how is it going to work when it comes to paying this money back? How is it going to work when our Black communities, particularly our ACB, I should say, communities are having a tough time during this pandemic where racial segregation still exists? White supremacy doesn't have any bounds. It didn't stop when you were the first call of COVID-19 started. It didn't say, well, hey, wait a minute, let's now start looking at equality. That didn't happen. White supremacy continued, and the white supremacy is going to still continue because there's no effort to try to work in relation with solidarity with those who are oppressed in our country, our white settler nation state. So this is very problematic on many fronts. On the surface level, as I mentioned, it could boost economic, increase economic, portfolios for a Black community. But then again, it goes back to when it's time to pay, how much are we paying back? And that there is the concern and issue with these so-called loans. We're not seeing, any grants that should be given, which would be highly advantageous for our Black communities to actually build some economic power. Again, it's the first thing is a loan, and then you see this money attached with all these companies. I don't mean to be dumb. My last word here is we need to be very wary about what these loans really mean for our Black communities.
Good start, Warren. Thank you so much. And so just to provide some additional context on the 221 million, so I'll just get into more detail. Of the total new investment to which Canada banks are contributing, slightly more than 2/5, $93 million will be distributed by the federal government. This includes $53 million to create a, quote, new ecosystem fund, unquote, which will give Black business owners access to funding and business services. Another $33 million will be handed out through a, quote, Black Entrepreneurship Loan Fund, unquote, whereby Black business owners can receive between $25,000 and $250,000 in loans. Up to $6.5 million will be used to create, quote, a Black Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, unquote, to collect data on Black entrepreneurs, including kinds of barriers to success they encounter. So the country's largest banks will be providing an additional $128 million in loans. So half of that money is coming from the banks. And if you don't think the government doesn't want their money back, the banks are surely going to make sure they get their money back. So I just wanted to add some additional context. Next up.
I'll go, I guess.
Go for it.
So yeah, to add to Warren's critique of capitalism, let's look at the history of some of these banks. We know Royal Bank and many other banks are heavily invested in the tar sands in Alberta, for example, right? So when we talk about Indigenous rights in Canada, and particularly the actions of the RCMP in policing and criminalizing Indigenous people in order to pull Indigenous people off the lands to access oil and natural gas and other resources, we know our banks are heavily invested in that. So that's one thing to think about. Scotiabank, of course, which was Canada's first bank in the Caribbean, has a long history of colonial banking, a long history of that kind of exploitation. And we can go through each bank and talk about the kinds of investments in military and weapons, the kinds of investments in policing, the investments in oil, the investments in mining companies and other extractive industries that destroy the environment and harm the livelihoods of indigenous people, the investments in all kinds of industries that interrupt the sovereignty of Africa. So that's where we're going to be getting these loans from. So that's the first piece that adds to this notion of, what it means when our liberation comes from banks. We also know, I'm going to guess that this is in concert with the large amount of attention that was paid to the formation of the Black North Initiative, and particularly Wes Hall, who has been, everywhere on our screens lately, and of course is a corporate figure, an entrepreneur, which I just point out to say that, this package, which is announced as $221 million, is 10 times the amount, $25 million, that was announced for all Black organizations in Canada in 2018, and 19 million was announced, I believe, in the same year for mental health and youth. So we see those comparatively small amounts for organizing, for youth, and for mental health, and then a comparatively, although obviously blown up and exaggerated amount when you actually look at what it's padded with, and it's actually just loans, but 10 times the amount at least announced for business. So that, again, sort of suggests the kind of priorities and who the government sees as worth listening to and who's at the table, right? So for all our talk about justice, for example, we have not seen any kind of justice fund released by the government. So I think that's also notable that they're willing to, at least announce so much money into entrepreneurship. And of course, that comes along with the notion of, the one thing Black people do that is actually like pulling their socks up, as opposed to, all the things Black people want to live off the system with, like housing or health, right? So there's a particular respectability politics behind the idea of entrepreneurship, which fits into capitalist models of the problem in the Black community is, our lack of going after things and our need to, pull ourselves up, rather than, of course, recognizing systemic racism and how many times the obstacles have been through that, and how we have to invest in education and invest in health and invest in all these other things, which, as we have seen, have been such small amounts. And let's not forget that, 2017, when the Liberal government acknowledged a decade of people of African descent, which is 3 years after the decade started. And I believe it's 2018, which is the first budget that ever even includes Black people. And of course, we were supposed to be really excited about that. Black Canadians are named in the budget the first time. And it was for these tiny amounts, which is less than they spend to decorate their offices, or a rounding error, in whatever other portfolio. So we're trained to think that these small amounts are somehow significant. And that in itself was kind of, again, blown out of the water by the notion that when it comes to business, they could have given us 221 million, but we were supposed to be celebrating 19 million 2 years ago. So just to point that out. And yeah, we also know that those funds have not actually been distributed. So we'll see what happens with that. There was recently an article, I think in July, in the Globe and Mail that pointed out that $25 million actually had not made it to community funds and had not been adequately distributed. So we're also seeing these problems of, it's one thing for the money to be announced, it's another thing for the money to actually make it into our pockets as well. So I think those are some of the things we have to be very wary of when it comes to this idea of taking money and this discourse around what it means. Will we actually see it? As Warren has pointed out, what does it mean to repay that? So this isn't really in line with goals around business, self-determination through business, circulating black cash. These are ideas that people have been putting out there, and then sort of to have the government insert itself on that conversation. We'll see. But in the past, we've also been sold these ideas as well. And then, of course, these ideas of more institutes and more data and more reports. How does it cost $63 million to get data on businesses and entrepreneurship? What kind of program is that? That seems sort of excessive to me. So it also looks padded with a lot of kind of things that are made to look like this is this big announcement. And then when you start breaking it down, it's considerably less than we're being told. So those are my comments on it.
Thank you very much, El. Cesar?
The disadvantage of being last is that I get to applaud Warren and El. Great things they said, can we go to the next topic?
I know you can fit something in, my brother.
No, honestly, first of all, I want to say this. It's not about being so critical that to come off so negative, especially for our Black community listening to us in Canada and beyond. But I think, notably from a Pan-Africanist lens, this is one of those beautiful moments I mean, they happen all the time actually, but it's very visible here, where it's far less about being liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat, whatever, but about being black. And by this, what I mean, Warren started to address it. We're talking here about loans. These are not interest-free loans. As you said so well, Dr. Vibe, banks being involved is always a matter of profit. This is not a donation. At the same time, I, who have brothers and friends who are entrepreneurs, am concerned. I want to see them succeed. As Warren said, we are in a COVID context. Beyond social distancing will come a certain paranoia, a certain apprehension, notably in terms of consumerism, because when we think about it, looking at the stock market, those who notably made the most money in terms of this pandemic are those who are e-connected, those who can do the online thing. And yet, if you're truly honest, Black entrepreneurship more often than not is going to be person-to-person, physical presence, kind of mom and pop, you know, my friend, my brother, my sister, etc. At the same time, when we're speaking here in terms of this government initiative, which is not a first of all, but of that substantial amount of money, well, on one side, I want to congratulate Prime Minister Trudeau, and he's backed by Blacks that I respect, whether we think of, for example, the president of the Black Chamber of Commerce, Andrea Barrett, who spoke very eloquently and notably recognized that Canada is lacking to the US. That's great. But also my friend, MP Greg Fergus, who I absolutely support, and I love when he speaks regarding Black issues. Absolutely. But let's be honest. I'm sorry, in light of a government that comes up saying that this amount of money is regarding racial disparities, inequities, and everything that Black Canadians have been going through in this country. I'm going as far back as slavery, the Marie-Joseph Angelique Underground Railroad, and especially Africville, where Black people were not just liberated, but still victims of discrimination, such as basically school segregation ending in 1996, but the first race riots, 221 million, notably with banks' contribution. I'm sorry, it's nothing. It's not a big deal. It's not a big deal, especially in this colonized land where so much care and concern for the Black population, and yet indigenous, Wet'suwet'en, our indigenous sisters and brothers are still at the bottom, and they don't just protest for gas pipelines in Wet'suwet'en just as 30 years ago over a golf course in Oka, but they're still at the bottom, and they're the indigenous of this land. So at the same time, it makes me wonder, when a nation as Israel, regarding the plight of Jewish people in Europe, has been given billions of dollars in terms of apology, billions of dollars in euros, as you want, in terms of apology, in terms of economic and financial aid, when they have been given so much, and yet we're looking here in terms of the Black community and the government speaking of this amount of money with recognition to the fact that it's not just about economic justice, but tied to so many other issues such as police reform. Is that enough? Is that really sufficient in terms of what you need? Remember, this is not free. It's not interest-free. And then what happens 4 years after? Because at least this is guaranteed for 4 years in terms of no Black entrepreneur being refused, notably due to race. Andrea Barrett said it so well. The biggest hurdle to a Black entrepreneur, notably being able to have access to capital, is first and foremost being Black. But what happens after 4 years? And notably, what happens with a likely risk of a change of government when we look at the credible opposition of the Conservative Party of Erin O'Toole, who, in the same sentence of saying this is a party that welcomes all, notably, despite you racial differences, deny systemic racism. And we were here last month talking to Leslie Lewis, the Black candidate to the party leadership, who didn't address systemic racism. So it's not a gift, but it can be quite a trap. And as Elle said it so well, the care and concern of Canadian banks and government in terms of Black entrepreneurs here in Canada to change and uplift the Black community, while these are the same banks and Canadian government that are involved in notably the economic repression of our countries, Haiti, countries in Western and Central Africa, Congo. I don't want to dismiss it. I don't want to reject it all. But my Pan-Africanist consciousness is quite bothered by what seems pretty much like a trap. Pretty much like a trap, because 25,000 up to 250,000, I'm sorry to say this, it's a great initiative on paper that notably does not exist in a country like France, where I come from, where I grew up in. Sure, but it can seem like quite a trap in the reality of things to come, in the reimbursement, in the dealings of what can seem, I'm being very honest here, like a beautiful, well-oiled capitalism schism. If we look at the fact of, is this also to bring more loyalty in terms of Black voters in identity politics to the Liberal Party? Such things cause me very big problems, Dr. Vibe. Very big problems.
Thank you so much for sharing. I know our time's up, but I just want to ask another two-part question. Oh, well, maybe a one-part question. Are Black Canadian businesses ready to handle this money?
Very.
Go ahead, Warren. Go ahead, Warren. Warren was first.
And I was alluding to that. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts again. You know, when we talk about social capital, you know, which we don't talk enough about in our Black community, there's a lot that needs to be, you know, knowledge need to be transferred or to be given to our Black community. You know, it's fine and dandy to drive the big nice car. It's fine and dandy to, you know, live in a nice house, you know. But if you know, a report came out recently where it was discussing a lot of Canadians were living day to day off their credit cards and, you know, not saving. And if that's Canada wide, and generally speaking, I would like to know what our Black communities' financial, you know, backgrounds, you know, portfolios are, you know, looking like, respectfully. Not saying I want to know how much money people have. And so not to trouble that water, but, you know, to answer the question, it's tough to answer, because then it says it generalizes all Black people. You know, we have to look at specifics here. You know, one of the things that I've noticed, particularly, and this is not me in no way doing harm when I mention this, you know, international students, particularly, you know, students I've noticed coming from Nigeria, Ghana. The one thing I noticed that they do is they come to this country, they achieve that education, and many of them go back home, you know, either to invest in their communities or invest in their countries, or if they stay, they're very close knit with their Ghanaian or Nigerian communities. When we look at Caribbean Black folk, you know, we don't see that unity in comparison to what I just mentioned. You know, you're seeing a lot of, in particular, you know, I spent a lot of time in Montreal, particularly with the Nigerian community there, and I'm so humbled enough to even be, respected enough to be, hang out with those people or and be in solidarity with those people. But I noticed that money doesn't go further than that community. It stays right in there. They support their restaurants, they support their clothing, they support, anything to do with their kids. Like, it's very a close knit community. And in our Caribbean communities, Black Caribbean communities, it doesn't say that doesn't exist, but it's not in comparison. And I use those references to acknowledge that, when it comes to really Black economic power, that money has to filter through the Black community. We saw that in an example of Black Wall Street in 1921. Please don't, I'm always getting those years mixed up. So please Google it. Don't fact check me on that. I'm going to go with 1921. I think that's what it is. But we notice in a historical moment like such as that, we noticed that the Black community in America was able to, sustain the Black dollar until, again, white supremacy came across and leveled that community. Tulsa, Oklahoma. But we're not seeing enough of that here, and that's where it's problematic for me to say, I'm skeptical in saying, well, yes, outright that yes, we will be able to, as Black folk, quote unquote Black folk, to manage that money appropriately within our community. But I'm not sold that all of us are on that way of thinking. A lot of us are trying to keep up, not using L. Jones's name, but keep up the Joneses here. In terms of keeping white supremacy, Fanon talks about this, constantly in his books, Black Skin, White Mass, the wretched of the earth, in terms of how Black bodies or the Negro is striving to be white and striving to be on economic par with whiteness. I think a lot of Black businesses are going to demonstrate that, respectfully said, and it's not to say they're the terrible ones and we need to be cautious, but frankly I am saying that at the same time, we got to be unison here when we talk about this black loan. If we're smart, if we collectively come together and we say, okay, listen, I'm going to support L. Jones's business, money's going to flow there, then I'm going to go to Dr. Vibe's business, I'm going to support that he does hair cutting or whatever he does, we support it. And if we were to do that, then we would see more of a economic power in our Black community. But we're not even seeing that before this loan, and that's where we have to work on. So I don't answer that question dead on with a yes or no. I give more examples and more statements to it. But that's that's what I sit with, or what I'll lend to the conversation.
Thank you so much, and thanks to one of the viewers, Thaddeus House, put up some information about Black Wall Street, Oklahoma, 1921. You were on, Warren. No worries. You were good. Okay. I know that Cesar, I know you have something else to add. So who wants to go first?
Yeah, I was just going to also say that there's business and there's business. So that's also gendered. Do these loans go to women that are braiding hair in their home? Does that count as a business? Does that go to the business of women who are watching children? So what's classed as a side hustle, much classed as a business, is also very social class, and it's particularly gendered. So it's also the question of, it's one thing to say these loans won't go to, race won't be a barrier, but what are we actually looking at? So for example, here we have a Take Black Gottingen, which is a Black business fair that they do pop-ups and stuff. And a lot of it is like home businesses, like people have created their own art or t-shirts. And, are those the kind of things that are going to be getting these loans, or are they going to be looking at a particular kind of business? And then what does that mean? For example, if a woman wants to take that money, but while she's building up her business, she still needs to be on assistance, is she going to see that clawed back? And so you're actually going to see people who maybe are like, okay, I do this thing with maybe like braiding hair and making hair, and I want to start a business where I'm able to, I don't know, manufacture wigs or something, and I want this $25,000. But is that coming off social assistance or your child check or other things that's sustaining you? So we're not also looking at the intersections with other forms of poverty, what it takes to start a business. And there's a kind of assumption here. There's a huge difference between getting $250,000 because you have a dental degree and you want to set up a dental office, which is something that will pay itself back, and then the kinds of businesses that people who are living in poverty, people living in housing that don't even allow you to have home businesses. So how does that work in housing here? You're not supposed to have a home business in the space of housing. So there's all these other kinds of intersections where the implication here is that I think a certain type of person with a certain type of business model that really belongs to, I think, probably a white conception of a middle-class conception, like business school conception of what entrepreneurship is, when in fact we know in our communities entrepreneurship has worked in different ways because people have figured out how to be entrepreneurs in between also figuring out how to make that work within constraints. So is this also going to, for example, price people out? If like one set of people get money who are university educated, are they going to be able to like corner food delivery businesses that right now maybe someone's hustle in the hood, that's like doing that out of their own kind of money, and now somebody else can come along and because they have a business school education, they're able to get this loan and price them out? Like these are class questions as well, right? That are going to be very serious questions when it comes to the ways that small businesses operate. And again, particularly for women and for young people, versus what this may do in order to essentially gentrify some of that. So that's also a concern.
Cesar,
one quick thing.
Oh, go ahead, Warren.
Thing. Al, thank you for bringing up that gender and social class. You hit it right on the head. I really appreciate you saying that, because when we talk about women businesses, we don't, especially women Black businesses or Black women businesses, we do not acknowledge that enough. So I want to give that a nod. Thank you.
No problem. Cesar, final comments on the first conversation topic.
You know what? Honestly, Warren stole my thunder again because I was going to talk about Black Wall Street. And Al finished what I wanted to say regarding the notion of gender. And when I say we're talking about gender and class and the Eurocentric lens, you know, things that I teach and that I train every week, I'm thinking of the Black single mother. I'm thinking of that single mother who too often, even in the Black community, let's be honest, gets looked down. So let's imagine even more by institutions such as banks, aka the white capitalist Eurocentric system. So allow me just to take that minute to translate very shortly for our francophone friends instead. Mes amis, sœurs et frères, le sujet qui porte sur le programme d'entrepreneuriat du gouvernement canadien de Justin Trudeau pour la communauté noire. Alors la question vraiment est de savoir est-ce que c'est vraiment un cadeau, un avancement, ou bien c'est un piège, un cadeau empoisonné. Et en ce sens, notre frère Warren a très bien parlé par rapport au fait de la notion du capitalisme financier et également rappelé Black Wall Street 1921 où une communauté noire s'entraidant elle-même a été démolie par une oppression blanche et une jalousie très forte. Notre sœur, elle, a très bien parlé du fait de ces mêmes banques qui contribuent à l'oppression de nos pays et également, elle vient tout juste de rappeler la notion du genre, la notion de classe, la notion du fait la personne qui aura fait l'école d'affaires par rapport à la personne, le salon de barbier, la mère qui fait les tresses, la babysitter, la gardienne d'enfants. Et en ce sens, j'ai tout simplement ajouté le fait de la conscience noire. Est-ce que c'est un piège empoisonné? Parce que ce ne sont pas, comment on appelle, ce n'est pas sans intérêt. Attention. Et de surcroît, il faut aussi penser au fait que, est-ce que c'est un piège pour notamment garantir une loyauté des voteurs noirs aux élections pour le Parti libéral?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Just want to put up the comments from Thaddeus saying the question of, quote, opportunity hoarding, unquote, is the primary concern of people with money over people without money but have ideas. The unofficial caste system is designed to starve businesses without the capital to maintain them. So great point by Thaddeus. We're going to move on to our next conversation piece. We have our two gentlemen are from Ottawa, but Elle also has something she'd like to contribute on this conversation topic. There is a video depicting the chief of Ottawa police as Adolf Hitler is being condemned by those both inside and outside the province's police community. And I did not know about this story. Cesar brought it to my attention. So Cesar, I'd like you to start with this first.
Very simply, last year when Chief Slowly was announced, and in my quality of equity expert on the Community Equity Council and also co-chair of the Anti-Racism Subcommittee, one of the things I remember telling him in a meeting was absolutely my support, notably as the first Black man in his position, as I've often been the only Black man in the room and in certain positions. But to be honest with you, to compare a Black man, to compare a Black woman, a Black person, whatever the position, such as chief of police or else, to Hitler, Adolf Hitler, a man who basically brought the notions of racism, scientific racism, eugenism, fascism to a level unseen in history, notably to this, not just World War II, because other nations, European nations are to blame as well, but the genocide, yes, of 6 million Jews, but let us not forget gypsies, homosexuals, disabled people, and Black people. This is not taught. Adolf Hitler sterilized hundreds or thousands even of Blacks born in the area of Renania. Adolf Hitler contributed to the killing of hundreds of Black soldiers, but also civilians. So in that sense, I contributed to the article on CBC, but also All in a Day, the All in a Day audio. I'm incensed, but I'm not really surprised, to be honest with you, because this is what happens. As my brother, Ndema-Moussa, Ndema-Moussa, who contributed to the illustrated Black Canadian history books Trailblazers, said, the more you denounce systemic racism, the more the racists around you, notably within an institution as police, claiming to protect and serve. But of course, it depends on the skin tone we're really talking about. For many, that's when you really see them coming out. And this gross editing of the movie Downfall to compare Chief Slowly, to compare the black man, Peter Slowly, to Adolf Hitler in terms of him officially, publicly denouncing that there is systemic racism in our police, it's an insult to humanity. It's an insult to decency. And let us be clear here, it's a hate crime towards Black people, but also towards Indigenous people in terms of references in the editing. And it's a reference, an insult, a hate crime to the Jewish community. It must be that those who are investigated in terms of those behind that video must be prosecuted fully. Enough of this Black turning cheek, enough of this minimizing issues of pain, trauma, and injustices towards the Black community. They must be found, they must be investigated and prosecuted to the full extent of the law, because let's be honest here, the likeliness of Black cops or Black citizens making such a video to compare a white official, notably denouncing systemic injustices, comparing him to Hitler, very few would doubt that these Black people would not be prosecuted. So I insist the same must be occurring to them. That's what I said in the CBC article and audio.
Thank you very much. Who wants to come in next on this?
I have no problem. Al, do you want to go?
Sure, I'll go. So I think the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that the downfall meme is a kind of like long-standing meme. So I think we also have to contend with this idea of it's just a joke, right? So there's been a long series. It was actually kind of an outdated meme. It was really popular like 5 years ago or something, of people editing into this. So what that, of course, opens up is this whole realm of kind of ironic racism, ironic Holocaust humor, where the response to people saying this is unacceptable is, don't you know it's a joke? Don't you know it's a meme? Oh my gosh, you're so stupid. You don't even know that this is this meme and it's ironic and we've done all these things, which of course demonstrates, I mean, this is a very modern, like this is one of the ways that like the alt-right has been really successful, right? Like being able to meme things, meaning like, you know, creating these kind of ironic tableaus, and then you're able to distance yourself from what you're saying because, oh, it was just funny. And then if you take me seriously, you're really the loser here. So whether that's, you know, like Pepe the Frog memes, this has been a whole thing. So we're also seeing this, which I think is really important in talking about a lot of the ways this discourse takes place. Because what we see is a lot of this public nod, wink, wink, putting things in public and then saying you were joking or it's not what you thought it was. So the only person being sensitive here is you. And so this is also one of the tools of that kind of thing, which of course is, you know, based in so-called Holocaust humor, right? Like it's overall based in trivializing this notion. And then we're all supposed to be in on the joke. So don't we all get it, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And the second thing I wanted to say is all this is in response in particular to an editorial that Chief Solly wrote in the, I believe, Ottawa Citizen or whatever. So he wrote an editorial, I don't know, can't remember the newspaper. And it's pretty anodyne. He just said that, you know, we need to, it was in response to a case where a man had been stopped in Ottawa, a Black man. They had said his plates are expired and the plates weren't expired. So he said, this is racial profiling. And Solly basically said, as police, we have to accept that like systemic racism does exist. And we basically have to, you know, interact with people and understand that. So basically like, hey, there's a reality and we have to engage that reality. And all the Ottawa cops lost their shit. Predictably, and like this is why they're so angry with him, right? Because he acknowledges systemic racism exists. So my point here is that I think the cops make their own best argument for why they can't be retrained and why they need to be defunded. Because we have a lot of cop apologists out there, including some that work for like anti-racist organizations that are prominent, that, for example, are retweeting this Chief Solly article and being like, oh, we need to defend Chief Solly, but then are out here arguing that all we need to do is train the police, when in fact this shows you that the police are resistant to training. They believe that training them in anti-racism is actually an insult. They're extremely fragile about this. And every time you address the police, even the most mild critique of them, there's an immediate Blue Lives Matter response. These are people that wear bracelets in support of officers that have killed people and wear that on the job. You know, these are police unions that come forward and argue for like why they need to kill you and racially profile you and why that's a necessary part of policing. And these people have been resistant all the time. They're not welcoming anti-bias training. They're not saying we want to learn more about systemic racism. We recognize this. Please let us participate in this learning. We saw the chief superintendent of the RCMP this summer said there was no systemic racism and then only crawled down once she was put under all kinds of pressure. So my point here is they're making their own arguments. So I'm glad they continue to show their ass on these things in public, because what they show us is anybody who's like wants to engage with them and pretend that they just want to learn and we just need to spend all this extra money to train them. Look at their own reactions to suggestions about training. They can't even handle it coming from their own police chief who is defending the police, right? Chief Slawley still believes in police. He believes that we need to, address systemic racism, but he's not saying we need to abolish this institution. He's trying to rope us back into supporting the police, right? If only we made these changes, we could support the police, and his own officers are undermining that. So I'm actually really glad they do these things in public in that sense, because it reinforces for us that we simply cannot reform this system. It's not simply bad apples, and they don't want us to teach them, and they don't want to reform themselves, and they don't want to learn about racism. They don't want to interact with us in other ways. And every time they're pushed on that, they lash out in very violent ways. They become extremely fragile. They become extremely hurt and offended, and they always respond with racism. So they all need to go. And that's the exact argument for why we can't bother with these people. Why policing will never work. So that's my take on it.
Thank you so much, Elle. And Warren?
Whoa. Wow. A lot in my mind, but little time. So first off, let's talk from an anthropological perspective. When we talk about culture, it's measured based on time and space. And the reason why I start here is because Ottawa has now, not even now, like, to be very honest with you, here's another example. Ottawa has shown their true colors when it comes to white supremacy. I'm from Toronto originally, and when I moved here, I was in culture shock. I was like, this is how Ottawa really responds to people of color or racialized people or Black people, particularly in certain situations. I'll give a quick story. My first moment in a gym here in Ottawa, I was approached by a white male. Looked at me, called me. I dare not say the word on public viewership this way, but he called me a homophobic slur, and I am not homophobic. But needless to say, nor am I'm gay. But I appreciate people from the different intersections. I'm not for that. I'm a big guy, probably not as big as Dr. Vibe because he's got some muscle on him. But when people usually look at me, they see Warren like, oh my gosh, no, I wouldn't probably want to even come to that guy on that level. But this was quite weird to me coming from Toronto. I'm not saying I'm a bad man and I don't go around and act that way, but it was quite weird to me where it was in my face and someone telling me this word, where I had to take a step back and say, did this really happen? This is Canada? And based on that situation, I lost it. I feel no ways in telling people that. I'm a human being. I almost threw him through the window. I almost did. It didn't happen because the Good Life staff came upstairs and they didn't grab me, but they calmed me down before I put my hands on him. Point of the story I'm trying to make here, folks, is that Ottawa is a very different place when we speak about white supremacy. I am not shocked at the words of Hitler being thrown at the now Black police chief of Ottawa. I'm disheartened. I know that he's coming with good. I've had a few meetings with him, and he's got his mandate, which speaks to equality, diversity, speaks about empowering our Black communities. However, we're noticing that white supremacy is definitely rampant within the city, and it's taking a turn. Looking at a Black man, I'm going to bring gender into this now, where it's not appreciating a Black man in power. It's not appreciating a Black man who's able to be free thinking and bring ideas that create diversity within the city that's desperately needed. We're seeing how white supremacy is now putting in check what it always does for Black men, particularly. Not saying Black women don't experience this too, but Black men who are always put in check to be the belittled and seen as this aggressor type person. when you compare anybody to Hitler, you're flat out saying this person's no good for business. You're saying this person is doesn't believe in humanity. This person is the worst person that you could, define by defining it by comparing him to Hitler. If we, as Cesar just mentioned, Hitler was one of the worst human beings that ever walked the face of the earth, and based on what he did to a lot of people from a racialized, particularly Jewish community. Like, how do you go on record and call someone Hitler? That's another shot of villainizing black men or black manhood, black man particularly. I'll give an example with me. When I first started at Carleton, I had a student, write a statement on their essay, and then asked for office hours with me to argue that their statement was actually a question. So I sat down with them and I said, no, this is a statement. It's not a question. They took that information, went back to their home, and keep in mind, this is a white student, and came back and told me, my mother told me to tell you that you're wrong. What? On what grounds? Right? So, this is the lay of the land when it comes to Ottawa. I can give you countless examples every time I've been pulled over for no reason. I can give you countless examples where I'm walking through the airport and a cop just comes up to me and says, what are you doing here? You know what I mean? Like, more so this happens in Ottawa in comparison to Toronto. It is craziness that happens, what happens here in Ottawa. So am I shocked that this happened to the police chief? No, but I'm disgusted. And I think we need to be very critical when we talk about race, anti-blackness, particularly here in Ottawa. It's on another level. You've got, it's a government town, as people know, many people know. It's not as high traffic as in Toronto. It's a very white town in comparison to how diverse Toronto is. So coming and bringing the diversity into the city, particularly this police force, which in my opinion desperately needs it. They're not gonna take that laying down. They're not gonna be open-minded to that. And I say laying down, not saying that they need to shut up and just follow his lead. But respectfully, they should be working a relationship solidarity with the police chief. Why not? He is the police chief. And I'm not certain who mentioned it. I'm not sure if they found out who mentioned it, but I can bet my bottom dollar it came from within their police force. So when you look at it, this is another example of, again, white supremacy calling out black masculinity to what they view and how it should be defined, which is in a villainizing sense. This is, again, white supremacy ensuring that it shows no bounds and how it continues the social discourse of villainizing black bodies. This is another sense of white supremacy pushing back against true equality and true diversity within the city that desperately needs it.
Thank you, Warren. Fantastic. Some other comments here. Sarah is saying, I wonder what our black officers think about the attacks against Chief Soley. She also asks, the Ontario Police Service needs better recruiting criteria, not training. And Kevin Messon from New York is saying, it's like District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. I see your hand up. Go ahead, Cesar.
Very quickly, I just want to add something. I've actually yesterday, I'm not going to name the city, but I've actually yesterday began training, educating, addressing issues with the police force, not in Ottawa, none is profit in their own city, But one of the things that's important for us to understand, two things. As Black people, we must never be surprised at racism towards us. This is not a 2020 thing because of Black Lives Matter or back then with Obama or New Millennium type of thing. No, this is centuries long in the Western world. And we're talking about 1,400 years in terms of the Northern Africa, Arabic, Middle East world. And we're talking of 4,000 years regarding India, where there's anti-Black racism. And the second thing I want to say regarding police, and one of the things I explained to the senior leadership, the issue is not a matter of police training. That is a lie. If it was a matter of police training, we would see Black cops, Asian cops, and indigenous cops killing unarmed white women and unarmed white grandparents. It doesn't happen. The issue is a matter of police culture within police as an institution, within a global society. Canada as a colonized land, which is also an imperialistic nation, for all that he hides behind that best nation to live in by the United Nations and other rhetoric as America, land of freedom, France, terre des droits et libertés. This is a matter of culture. The same culture oppressing Black and Indigenous people on race, women on gender, LGBTQ people on sexual orientation, disabled people, etc., etc. It's a matter of power, oppression, and discourse. So I'm not surprised. And as Warren said, and I've said it to CBC very openly, this is definitely and most surely coming from white cops within the force. There are these KKK with a badge are there in the police forces, as in hospitals, as in our schools, etc., etc., etc. Very briefly, pour nos amis francophones, c'est tout simplement le sujet du chef de police d'Ottawa qui, dans une vidéo, a été comparé à Adolf Hitler. Et pour amener les éléments ici, notre sœur, elle, a bel et bien parlé du fait que ce n'est pas juste une simple question d'une vidéo, comme certains, trop souvent des Blancs, et pas juste des Blancs, aiment dire c'était une blague. Non, c'est un acte criminel, c'est un acte haineux, comme Warren nous le rappelle si bien, avoir subi des altercations racistes à Ottawa, et le fait que cette ville a un gros énorme de problèmes de racisme systémique, mais se voile parce que c'est une ville gouvernementale. Et par rapport à moi, j'ai ajouté le fait que, ayant débuté hier la formation de la haute direction d'une force de police dans une autre ville, car nul n'est prophète dans son pays, mais je leur ai bel et bien rappelé, le problème de la police n'est pas tant une question de formation, mais c'est un problème de culture dans l'institution policière, tout comme dans la société canadienne occidentale, car cette notion de violence, d'oppression du pouvoir, et notamment dans le langage, se poursuit dans les institutions comme sur la scène internationale.
Thank you so much, all three of you, for your takes on this. And sounds like it's going to be an ongoing story on what's going on in Ottawa. And I guess I better be careful the next time I come to Ottawa. I'm going to have to call you for protection, Warren. Okay. We're coming up to the top of the hour. We're going to probably be a few minutes over because there is a final conversation piece we want to chat about today. And let's talk about it. 2 Louisville police officers were basically, let's know, Breonna Taylor. We all know, well, if you haven't heard about the case, your head's in the sand. Well, this past week, the grand jury in Louisville, Kentucky said, no, none of them are going to be charged for the shooting and killing of Breonna Taylor. And only one officer was charged, but that was being a neighborhood disturbance by shooting his gun. I think it's very important that we provide a Black Canadian lens on what we think and what we feel is what's going on with this case, and maybe what's going on with the current state of race, justice in Black America. Who would like to start with that?
I think Elle should address it first. As we say her name, and we definitely should let our Black sisters speak first on these type of issues.
Respect.
I agree.
Oh, okay. I was hoping you had some things to say. I think what's a bit different from this case from often is that we're often talking about police brutality in the context of Black men, because Black men do make up, obviously, the majority of these kind of encounters. Robin Maynard's book also lays out how policing as a vector also impacts Black women through things like social workers, the child welfare system, the idea that Black women are often under surveillance in the workplace in particular ways that Black women work in domestic spaces. So it is true, obviously, that Black men are often the people that are experiencing this. But I think one thing that does make this more unique in terms of, like, we don't often see these cases of Black women rising to this kind of prominence. And that was also behind the Say Her Name movement, right? Where people were recognizing that Black women are also victims of state violence. There's a lot of people that are also trying to remove the racial element of this and contextualize it only and solely within the war on drugs. And of course, yes, it is within the war on drugs. So this was a no-knock warrant that police able to just burst into your house. Of course, their justification, as they always like to criminalize Black people and say how we deserved it, is that the boyfriend was accused of getting packages delivered in the home. She was at the home. So, this is what you get for engaging with people with criminal records, right? This is the kind of discourse. But of course, they had already caught the main suspect who was across town by the time they did the raid. They had dismissed the ambulance an hour before that was supposed to be on standby. They lied on their report. So they said they never broke into the home. When the 911 call was made, the boyfriend said somebody broke into my home. Like, he didn't say police raided the home. So all of this is in the context, yes, of the ways that the war on drugs has allowed this kind of rampant police behavior without scrutiny and the growth of the kind of police force, as epitomized on shows like Cops, right, that really glorify this kind of activity, because like shows like Cops, always show the raid, the SWAT team, all of this stuff. And there's actually reports and studies that show, as Cops have absorbed these kind of shows that have now been on for like 30 years, 40 years, they actually come to, so those shows always represented a disproportionate idea of policing, right? So like most policing is not raids. Most people that you raid don't have drugs, etc. And then of course shows like Cops will only ever show successful raids and show raids being a huge part of policing. And there's studies that then show that Cops growing up watching that and internalizing that then actually make that a reality of their policing. So it's an example of like the virtual world actually becoming the world of reality. So we see Cops acting in more violent ways as well. And all this is to say that a lot of people are trying to de-racialize that now and saying, well, what we really need to talk about is the war on drugs, as though the war on drugs is not a racialized war, right? When we look at mass Black incarceration, we of course know that a huge engine of this was the war on drugs, which is specifically directed towards Black and Brown communities. And we see the difference, for example, in the way that opiates that affected white people have been treated as a health crisis, whereas crack was, of course, treated as the creator of crack babies and super predators. And, to have even a fraction of a crack rock was to get, 30, 40 life in prison, where white people who had cocaine get rehab, right? So the idea that the war on drugs is not inherently racial is an interesting one. And you're also seeing that argument among, race apologists that want to remove the racial angle. In many ways, it's a complex case in terms of there's a lot going on with the law, with the war on drugs, with gender, with the ways that in many ways they've been able to successfully smear and criminalize her. And so this is another thing you see, that Black people ourselves are always very willing to demonize a Black woman. So I see Black people flocking to be like, well, yeah, but I heard she had like drug convictions, which we often see from our own community the minute a Black woman is involved, I have to say, that people have no respect or love for Black women in particular. So for example, the case of Santina Rayo in Halifax, which was a Black mother shopping in Walmart who was beaten down by police in front of her baby and toddler, accused of shoplifting. And there were like Black people out there, particularly Black men, I have to say, they were like, I heard she shoplifts. So the willingness of Black people to demonize a Black woman in particular and successfully complete this notion of criminalizing and victimizing people in order to justify police behavior is notable. Not that we don't do it to each other in other contexts as well. We often have this respectability politics around like class politics and people who want to distance themselves from the criminals and all of this. But I just note that that was taking place in this case as well. But yeah, I think it's encouraging to see this kind of national attention to a case involving a Black woman, because historically it has not really been the case. We often tend to, again, take this gendered view of history. So talk about lynchings, but not the mass gang rape of Black women, not talk about sexual assault during slavery, not talk about the specific ways in which state violence is also gendered and which does sexual violence upon Black women and also criminalizes, for example, Black women's sexual relationships. So the notion that, well, if your husband or boyfriend is criminal, you become criminal by association, and then that's your own fault. So we also see the way that Black women absorb and are held responsible for the actions of everyone around them. So I think that's all I have to really say on that. And maybe once the other two comment, I may have something else to put in, but those are my preliminary thoughts.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Can I go? Okay. Because I can't hear you, Dr. Vibe. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll appreciate you. Thanks for leading this this topic here. Let me be a vulnerable human being, a vulnerable Black man to say that's not my name. I'm not Cesar. That I will never know what it feels like, what it means to be a Black woman. I'll never know that. And for me, and this is me appreciating Elle, that's why it meant so much for me to hear Elle go first, because as much as I study gender, as much as I teach gender courses, I will never know what that means to be a woman, particularly a Black woman. And this was a moment for me, and I encourage those who are listening, a moment for all of us, to actually take a moment and listen to a Black woman speak her truth, particularly on this matter of Breonna Taylor, which in my view, is not getting enough attention that it deserves. You know, George Floyd's situation definitely was one of the terrible situations we've ever, one of the, not the, but one of the most terrible situations we've ever seen across social media and all other media outlets. You know, when it came to Breonna Taylor, it was only a few people, a few organizations that took it upon themselves to highlight the injustice that Black women face. You know, particularly, I'll use, for example, the WNBA. The WNBA did an amazing job to continue the march to recognize and appreciate the life of Breonna Taylor, but the anti-Black racism and the white supremacy that caused her death through state violence on Black bodies. You know, so I really want to take an opportunity here for all of us to continue learning, continue listening to how and to understand how gender really cuts through our Black communities, Afro-Caribbean Black communities, or even Black thought itself, where we either ignore the lived experience of Black women, which is more so than Black men, particularly on this topic of police brutality, or we only know surface level of these issues when it plagues our Black men and Black women. We have to understand what it really means to to be a Black woman and experience racial injustice, particularly police brutality. But let me not segue too much. I'm going to talk too much or dominate too much on that one side. I want to mention or to speak more on the Breonna Taylor case. Was I surprised? No. I think Fanon is in my head more so these days than ever because of the social climate of racial injustice that's particularly happening in the United States. The Attorney General is a Black man. Did I have any hope that one, I don't believe in hope, but did I have any hope that a Black man will liberate or come to any liberation, I should just say, for Breonna Taylor? I didn't. Looking at his Facebook page, looking at his Instagram, his social media, his meetings or his talks that he's given, in the past 2 months, it shows that to me that Fanon is right. Fanon is mentioned in his book. Here we go. This is where we've noticed the Black man striving to be on par with the white man, and by doing so, by not by sharing his truth that will liberate our Black community, but sharing a truth that's going to continue to liberate white supremacy. That's what we saw. There's still call out from the lawyer of the family of Breonna Taylor to say there was what happened to all the evidence that was supposed to be given to the grand jury. Was it given to them? And there's still no comment. Now, do I believe that this the Attorney General should march in the streets with the Black community? Maybe that will help. But this is an opportunity for him to actually, if he hasn't, to then look at this evidence a bit more of a racial injustice lens that's had been happening, particularly in Black America, and continues to actually acknowledge what whiteness is doing to that country. Every day, every moment, there's something going on. Even if you don't hear it on CNN, even if you do not read it in the paper, it is happening continuously on a larger scale in comparison to Canada. It makes one could think that, it's about time to actually think about what white supremacy is doing to that country and how it's tearing down their country. Literally, it's burning down their buildings. Violence is erupting. Police officers are getting shot. Police officers are shooting and continue to shoot Black bodies. Like, I don't understand how much more evidence they need to see to say that, we have a problem here in this country. We have a problem in this state. For them to actually turn the leaf, with particularly with the case of Breonna Taylor and the grand jury, delivering their message the way they did, it doesn't look like they're ready to even accept another truth about what white supremacy is doing to their country. Is this going to happen again? We've seen more than 3 instances, which contributes to a trend, and we know anything about statistics. When you see it 3 times, it's gonna happen a 4th, and if it's happened 10 times, it's gonna happen 11th. It's become a social norm, and a in total injustice, but particularly a social norm to villainize, to kill socially, and to kill physically Black bodies, no matter what. Doesn't matter what happens in that country. From the other side looking in, I mean, other side being Canadians, Black Canadians, or just Canadians in general, looking towards the American social discourse there, particularly when it comes to anti-Black racism. We have an opportunity to learn from their mistakes, but here we go again, calling the Ottawa Police Chief Hitler. So we're not learning from their mistakes. We're saying, well, that makes sense from a Western perspective, so we might as well implement that here. But we're very subtle here, but in Canada. So all in all, not to prolong, I just want to respect the time, and I don't want to dominate. Maybe I have a little bit, I'm not sure, but all in all, this is another example of a discredit of a Black body, particularly a Black woman, and discredit of what white supremacy is doing to their country, and discredit what white supremacy is doing to North America in general. So I'll leave it there.
Can't hear you, Dr. Vibe.
Cesar, close out.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I wasn't surprised. I was really not surprised. How can I put it to you? Unfortunately, when we say Breonna Taylor, when we say Sandra Bland, when we say Régis Korczynski-Paquet, how many names are we not saying? Do we not know of? How many women, Black women, die or killed by institutional violence? And here we're talking about the police, but how many go unnoticed in the hospitals? How many become broken in other institutions, including work, etc., etc.? I absolutely was not surprised, and unfortunately, it reminds me of something I always tell Black people. Don't be surprised to be victims of racism. The issue is beyond, as we're talking, the police and the Justice Department. It's the culture. When I give training on equity, diversity, and inclusivity, there is an exercise on stereotypes, and after a compilation of stereotypes, I address and I answer them. One of the things that I explain is in terms of how whiteness constructed itself, the system works for those who are white. For those who are not white, especially Black, understand whiteness constructed itself in terms of race against Blackness. 2 days ago was the day of the francophone flag, franco-ontarien, le lys et le trillium. Well, that was 2 days ago. But 2 years ago, when the Ford government was talking about no longer financing the creation of a francophone university, they called it Jeudi Noir, Black Thursday. So one of the things that I try to explain to people is that the very culture, economic quilt, the media, the entertainment, we're talking about the banks, time and time and time again, so many examples and references, as Warren was saying, of anti-Blackness when we're having this conversation on race. So what you end up having is simply the fact that the death of Breonna Taylor, and then a grand jury talking about wanton endangerment, the walls of the white neighbors got more justice than the life of Breonna Taylor. The self-defense of her boyfriend, Mr. Walker, our brother, basically got dismissed. It got nullified by the very simple fact of not only all the proofs being brought forward, but the very fact of, I mean, let's be honest, Attorney General Daniel Cameron, who many talked about, how seriously is he taking the case when he's getting married in the heat of social injustice protests, Breonna Taylor. But at the same time, we dare to look at it. Allow me to show a book, if you don't mind. Warren spoke so well, but when I think of Breonna Taylor, yet another reminder of injustice in terms of anti-Black racism. And I think of Attorney General Daniel Cameron, because yes, the system is racist, the institution and all that, but there's something interesting here. Franz Fanon in his book, Black Skin, White Mask, Peau Noir, Masque Blanc, I'm thinking of a Daniel Cameron here, Attorney General, sure, marrying a white woman, but I mean, Colin Kaepernick is mixed, so it's not so much about him marrying a white woman. But Daniel Cameron, the white woman he's marrying is the granddaughter of Mitch McConnell, a white politician, Republican, very well known for his dismissal and rejections of notions of systemic racism in the defense of this Make America Great Again, where he prostitutes himself to Donald Trump politically and ideologically. I think, just as when Sandra Bland died, I remember this. She was not suicidal. That was the excuse given by the system to justify her death. Breonna Taylor's death, she died twice. She died on that day, being shot, and she was assassinated. And assassination is a murder motivated by ideology, such as in politics and etc. Breonna Taylor died in March by police brutality, yes, but she was assassinated by Daniel Cameron, the Black Attorney General, and his political ambitions. And she was assassinated by this grand jury and very system that we are talking about and decrying. The three topics we address today from the Black Entrepreneurship Program of Canada, Chief Slowly, police chief, as Al said, he believes in police, but at the same time, he's addressing systemic racism. And here we're talking about Breonna Taylor. They are linked. She was killed by police brutality in March, and she was assassinated by Daniel Cameron and the justice system this week. It's unfortunate to say, but this reminds me of why Pan-Africanism matters. It's beyond a matter of ideological movement. It's beyond a matter of, like some in social medias like to mock, Hotepism regarding ancient Egypt, as you see the pyramid behind me. It's beyond a matter of pure rejection of Christianity, Islam, and ideologies from the white and Arab colonizers and slave masters. It's a matter of survival of our people. It's the FUBU logic, for us by us. It's the very notion, and allow me to dare ask this question to Daniel Cameron, and I hope he will hear this. If Breonna Taylor had for last name Goldstein, Hirschman, Moskowitz, if Breonna Taylor was a white Jewish woman in the same situation, because for those who don't know, there were no drugs found in the apartment, and even justice proved that Brother Walker was not wrong in firing in the notion of self-defense. No, his firearms illegally acquired. So let me dare ask this question that must be said. If Breonna Taylor was a white Jewish woman, Daniel Cameron, you will dare to say as a Black man, it pains you. You will have these political ambitions. You were so proud to make that speech at the RNC regarding Donald Trump. You was on the short list of considered people by Donald Trump to replace the notorious RBG in the Supreme Court. If Breonna Taylor was a white Jewish woman, would you have said the same thing? Would you have come up to that same conclusion? This is an insult to the Black community, yet another insult. Breonna Taylor has been assassinated and sacrificed, not only on the altar of justice, on the altar of humanity, on the altar of race relations. And as Frantz Fanon said in the 50s, and for those of you who don't know, Frantz Fanon's wife was white, but as he said so well, we have too many Black people who are so brainwashed, alienated, complex, and basically self-hatred. They will do anything and everything to have the love of whites, and we can say Arabs, Asians, whatever dominant group, to the point that they become enemies and dangerous to their own Black brothers and sisters. This is beyond Daniel Cameron, of course, as a man. This is beyond Breonna Taylor as a Black woman and a victim. This is a very matter of survival in terms of our identity and our group as Blacks, even though we are not a monolith in this world of leucodermic white, Arab, Asian supremacy towards Blacks. We are seen first and foremost as Blacks. Breonna Taylor was killed in March, assassinated on the sacrifice of all of these elements that I talked about. Très brièvement en français, la mort de Breonna Taylor est juste un rappel du racisme, de l'injustice, mais pas juste au niveau de la justice, au niveau du fait de tout ce qui se passe dans ce monde, où notamment je parle de Frantz Fanon, comme quoi lui-même qui avait une femme blanche a bel et bien expliqué le fait que trop de personnes noires, dans une quête désespérée d'acceptation et d'amour des Blancs, des leucodermes, de ceux qui dominent les Noirs, se font eux-mêmes complices. Et en ce sens, j'ose poser la question très directe, très face à face, et j'espère qu'il entendra à l'avocat général, Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, cet homme noir avec des ambitions politiques, cet homme noir qui a parlé pour Trump, cet homme noir qui était sur la courte liste pour remplacer la juge de la Cour suprême américaine, Notorious RBG. J'ose lui poser la question, si Breonna Taylor était une femme juive, donc une femme blanche, dans le même cas, est-ce qu'il serait arrivé à cette même décision par rapport à ce grand jury? J'ose poser la question. Il faut qu'on se le dise, il faut qu'il réponde.
All right, that's the finish, and we're going to close it down. But Elle, as our Black queen of the panel, any final words you want to address in regards to Breonna Taylor and the aftermath?
I just want to acknowledge one person. I don't want to take away your shine. Gina had mentioned something in the comment that I think needs to be acknowledged. Respectfully, Gina, thanks for writing what you wrote. I read it. I was, waiting patiently for Cesar to finish. No shade at Cesar. But, when you say you've given up, I understand where you're coming from. There's been moments where I felt like, this fight doesn't even make sense anymore. And I can't tell you what to do, and I can't tell you, how to feel, and I can't tell you how to act. I appreciate you, for just acknowledging what you acknowledged. I don't think your vulnerability should just, not be using that word again, acknowledged in this type of forum. Elle, myself, Cesar, Dr. Vibe, I speak for all of us when I say this. Please reach out to us, if you need to, and we can brainstorm. We can, shoot the shit, if we need to. But the one thing I'm going to encourage all of our African and Black Canadians, and particularly here, is just don't give up. We can't.
Never give up.
Can't.
Never.
We can't at this moment. So I just want to, but again, I can't tell what to do or say, but just know we appreciate you. Thank you.
Elle, do you have any final words you have for us?
No, I just wanted to add that just in regard to something Cesar said, the Republicans are, of course, massively anti-Semitic, while, occasionally, gesturing towards Israel, for example, while, of course, using all kinds of narratives that are deeply anti-Semitic around, like, the New World Order and Jewish conspiracy and stuff like that. So just because, Jared Kushner is Jewish and his daughter is married to a Jewish man does not mean that in other ways the Republican Party is, of course, not, hugely grounded in also anti-Semitic ideas, particularly when that comes to ideas around money, ideas around, the notion that Jews run the banks, Jews run the world. So we also sometimes have to look at how that has interacted from the beginning with white supremacy as well. Of course, white Jews are white, but that's precisely what is also mobilized a particular form of white supremacy against Jewish people, which is the idea that like they can contaminate by passing, right? So I just think we also have to complicate the idea of how the Jewish community is particularly related to Republican governments, people like Trump, because they might on the surface sound like praising towards Israel. They'll always use that rhetoric, and certainly against Palestinians, and speak about the incivility of Palestinians and the importance of the Jewish state. But we know that's because they ultimately are end timers and believe that Israel is going to be the site of the resurrection, right? So I just wanted to briefly raise that. But no, it's a really great discussion today, and for everybody in the comments that's sharing specifically around the importance of ongoing resistance, like I agree.
Absolutely, and we'll keep you on screen, Al. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way? Other than Facebook, if there's anything else other than Facebook.
Email, like el.jones@msvu.ca. Yeah, you can always email me. Facebook, I always have the problem of adding more friends.
Okay. Warren Clarke, what's the best way people can get in touch with you? You're on mute, Warren.
Yes.
It's your turn this time.
You can connect with me through my website, warrenclarke.ca. Or, you could contact me at my email, warrengclarke@gmail.com. Yes, Warren G, like regulators, Warren G Clarke at gmail.com. So thank you.
Cesar?
Thank you very much. Great, important conversations. Allow me to just remind all our brothers and sisters in Canada and beyond listening to us as Sarah Onyengo. I'm going to read what Sarah Onyengo, my sister, great sister Sarah Onyengo said. We can't afford to give up this fight. As Cesar said, our very survival depends on our resistance to this oppression. I just want to remind our people that the very notion of oppression is built, constructs from ideology to imperialism and colonization. And as such, just as empires, the British French Empire, but also the American Empire, it will come to an end. And as such, we must never give up. As I teach, as I train professionals, but also students, I remind of two ideologies, two African ideologies. Sankofa, never forget your past, your roots, your identity as you move forward. And Ubuntu, I am because you are. We are together. We must always stay strong. And when we stand our truth, we speak our truth from our names to our realities to the topics we address. This is how we will get respect. On that note, I'm proud to announce to you, my friends, that my main account, I'm blocked on Facebook. Yes, I am. Blocked for 1 month, and I'm very proud of it because some of the issues that are addressed, that's what happens when you stand up. One of our Black Muslim brother, and I shouldn't call him a brother, was being a rape apologist in the name of Islam, and in standing up for our sisters, but truly for all women, I replied to him in a way that some Facebook censor strongly disagreed with. So you can reach me through Roots and Culture Canada. I have my backup account. All you need to type is Cesar Yuya, Yuya. Yuya. If you don't know who he is, look him up. You will be shocked. You will be shocked. Our Black people need to know the history, need to know the roots, need to know the interconnections of everything we talk about. And as such, when we stand up, just like in Haiti, la liberté ou la mort, freedom or death, never give up, never.
Thank you, everybody, to help make this an epic conversation today. I like the audience, the people in the chat room. Yeah, you were going with comments that they just like comments are still flying, and that is fantastic because these are outstanding individuals. Please follow them whatever way you can. Reach out to them. I'd like to thank Thaddeus. I'd like to thank Sarah, Dr. Tachi, Kevin, DeJounte, Gina Elizabeth. I'd like to read your comments, but we ran way over today, and I don't like running into these wonderful people's time, but it was important to get this message out. So I'd like to say thanks to everyone here. I'm Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations 2018 Innovation Award winner given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. Once a month, I host online conversations for fathers that are co-sponsored by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization, and Dove Men Care. As always, at the end of my conversations, I say, first of all, thanks to BIA Media for an epic production, and then live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions, then aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. God bless. Peace be well. Keep the faith. Walk good and give yourself grace. Bye, everybody.